Who can bring Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table? France? China? Brazil? Today, it was Turkey's turn to try its hand at convincing the visiting Russian foreign minister to seek peace. To be fair, Ankara is in a unique position to mediate. Its NATO membership and friendly ties with Moscow allowed it to broker one of the rare diplomatic breakthroughs in the year-long war. But when it comes to negotiating an end to the conflict, success is likely to be more elusive. Sitting down with his Turkish counterpart, Sergey Lavrov was very clear. For Russia, this is about much more than just Ukraine.
Ceasefire negotiations need to be based on the principles of the New World Order, which we all need, instead of a unipolar world order, an order led by one hegemon.
Moscow correspondent Grzegorz Szymanowski joins us from Riga, where DW has been operating since we were banned from Russia. Grzegorz, good to see you. Now, at the beginning of the war, it was the so-called denazification of Ukraine Russia was pursuing. Now, it's a new world order. How are they planning on achieving that?
Nicole, I think this is a clear sign that, as for now, Russia is not interested in starting peace talks, and that it is actually preparing its population for a long conflict and for a conflict for possibly much higher stakes. And it really draws from the Kremlin's rhetoric about international affairs. In the last 15 years, Vladimir Putin has many times accused the West and the US in particular of trying to dominate the world. And this is also how the Kremlin has been framing this war in Ukraine. It's been ignoring Ukraine's wishes to join the EU, to align itself with NATO, but it's portraying this conflict as Western aggression into Russian sphere of influence. So Russia presents itself as being on the defense, and yet at the beginning of the war, it clearly tried to topple the government in Kiev, and now, after Russia failed, it is now trying to weaken Ukraine by trying to separate the regions in the east of the country.
So what would this new world order Russia strives for look like?
Russian political elites contend that Russia should be a superpower in this multilateral, multipolar world order, and it should be also recognized as such by other countries. So practically it means a world divided into spheres of influence. And Russia sees its sphere of influence in the countries that are independent, that have become independent again after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it is really a world in which power counts, the agency of the weaker parts of the weaker states don't count.
I want to bring up something that really caught my eye today, because on the Kremlin's website, Putin says, "We are working in solidarity on the formation of a more just and democratic multipolar world order." That's what you just said, which should be based on the central role of the UN, its Security Council, international law, the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Now, isn't this an outrageous claim in light of everything this government is responsible for?
Of course, it's hypocritical, it's opportunistic, but it's also, Russia attacked Ukraine, Russia is breaking international law, but I think it's also important to whom is this message aimed at. For one, this message is clearly aimed for international audiences who are critical of the West, who are critical of the West's role in international policy. Russia wants to point out Western hypocrisy in this way. And on the other hand, this is a message for domestic audiences. This is a message for the Russians. Russia has been presenting itself as the force of good and the victim of a West in this case.
Yeah, they are portraying themselves as the victims here. And again, earlier this week, Moscow claimed that they had no choice but to keep fighting the war, that they couldn't see a diplomatic solution. How do people in Russia view it?
That's a good question. There are opinion polls being conducted in Russia, and by observing them, we could say that some 70% of Russians are in favor of the war, and some 25% are against it, and I think this. I think this message that the Kremlin is sending out, how the Kremlin is portraying the conflict, hits home, definitely, with many Russians. But on the other hand, we don't know how reliable these polls really are. This is what the sociologists have been telling us, that they don't really trust these numbers. And the question that they are asking themselves is if the people are really telling what they are thinking, or if the people are saying what they think is the socially expected answer from them. And add to that the wave of repressions in Russia, and we cannot clearly say what's the scale of support for Putin.
DW correspondent Grzegorz Szymanowski in Riga, thank you so much. Another key item on the agenda was extending an agreement that allows Ukraine to export grain through the Black Sea. The deal was brokered by Turkey and the UN in July, unblocking grain stuck in Ukrainian ports for months. Since then, it has allowed the export of more than 27 million tons of grain and agricultural product, but it's set to expire next month. Lavrov issued a warning to the West, saying Russia could pull out of the deal unless alleged obstacles to its own agricultural exports are removed.
If there is no further progress in removing barriers to the export of Russian fertilizers and grain, we will think about whether this deal is necessary.
Dorian Jones is in Istanbul and has more. Dorian, what obstacles is Lavrov talking about here?
Well, basically, he's saying that the export of Russian wheat and fertilizer and an agreement that was made in parallel with the Ukrainian grain deal is not happening because of various secondary sanctions that Russia's facing. Basically, the insurance of ships that carry Russian grain to world markets is being blocked because of secondary sanctions that are in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine that prevents Russia using ships. On top of that, even if they do get these wheat and its fertilizers into the world markets, it faces a huge problem of payment because the main means of payment through Russia's agricultural bank, an international banking operation that was created just for the payment of fertilizer and wheat, is outside of this international payment system called SWIFT. Now, if you're not part of that system, it makes it impossible for anyone to use the bank to pay for the wheat or fertilizer they've received. So Russia says, as of yet, it means that this deal is not working for them, and they're saying this is a question of foul play. They're going along with the Ukrainian deal to allow Ukrainian wheat to go to world markets, but the other side of the deal to allow its wheat and fertilizer to go to world markets is simply not happening. And that's why Russia's saying enough is enough, and they're saying that this has to change.
Yeah, this deal is vital to millions around the world, and nobody really wants Russia to abandon it. So what can Turkey do to ensure its full implementation?
Well, Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu, following his meeting with Sergey Lavrov, said, he says Russia does have a case here. They say that they have been working with the United Nations, and more importantly, they've been trying to lobby the European Union members to say that this we have to come up with a solution that allows Russian wheat and fertilizer to be exported and for Russia to receive payment. Now, critics say that this, if they're not careful, that Russia could exploit the system to use it as a backdoor to get around wider sanctions that Russia is facing, and therefore there's a lot of scrutiny that is required. Russia said that this is just a means of preventing them from receiving payment for a deal that they have reached. So there is an impasse here. Turkey's very keen to find a solution because this deal in many ways was a major victory of diplomacy for Turkey and vindicated what Turkey says its stance of having good relations with both the West and Ukraine and Russia. And so they are very keen for this deal to continue to work. But at the moment, they say that they really are facing a major problem here.
Lavrov has threatened to work outside the framework of the deal with the help of Turkey, precisely. What could that look like?
Well, that's not very clear at the moment. Lavrov did seem to indicate that already Turkey has been processing Russian wheat, turning it into flour, and presumably that has been re-exported through Turkish export channels, possibly circumventing sanctions. Now, Turkey always denies that, but there's a lot of suspicion among its Western allies that Turkey has become a backdoor for sanctions against Russia. But Lavrov says that they are working closely with Turkey and also Qatar to find ways of getting around the sanctions, which Russia says to serve the needy people. And another criticism that Lavrov raised at the press conference was that basically he says that the original deal for Ukrainian grain was meant to go to countries like Africa, nations that are in most need. And he said most of it is going to European countries. And he said that is also a problem. Now, the United Nations deny that, but Turkey says that they are very keen to work with Russia to make sure that countries like Africa who are in need of this grain, particularly if there is a world surge in food prices, a fear of possible famine. Turkey says they are committed to avoiding that, and they would work with Russia in possible ways to avoid such a catastrophe. But at the same time, this will raise concerns among Turkey's allies that Turkey again is suspected of possibly undermining international sanctions against Russia.
Ankara continuing its tightrope act there. Thank you so much, Dorian Jones in Istanbul. Great speaking to you. For weeks, we've been getting contradictory reports about the status of the eastern Ukrainian Bakhmut. Now, it looks like Russian forces may have made significant gains in the former mining town. That's according to British intelligence reports. The British say Putin's troops have probably taken the city center along with the western bank of the Bakhmutka River. They attribute the advance to a better coordination between Wagner mercenaries and Russian commanders. Ukraine denies the losses, but admits the situation remains difficult. Bakhmut has been under siege for months, seeing some of the fiercest fighting of the war.
This footage purportedly shows heavy fighting near Bakhmut. Pro-Russian channels on the social media platform Telegram are full of similar clips. Drone footage of central Bakhmut. British intelligence sources say the area is now likely under Russian control. Ukraine's military is simply calling this situation difficult.
In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy is trying to take the city completely and is continuing its attacks.
Kiev says that despite the tough situation, Ukrainian troops are holding ground against Russian units that have them outnumbered. Ukraine's military says Russia is making tactical advances, but paying a high price for them. But the pressure is mounting. Ukraine's supply lines are reportedly increasingly at risk. This footage shot on Thursday shows the main road into the city, one of the key supply routes.
How did we make it down this road? Well, we made it through, with God's help.
As the battle for Bakhmut rages, the Pentagon says it is investigating a leak of classified U.S. and NATO documents concerning Ukrainian military readiness and losses. Both Ukraine and the U.S. say the documents may have been tampered with and could contain misinformation that would benefit Moscow.